Next, we have the imperative to forge a hemispheric energy alliance with Assistant Secretary of State for Economic, Energy, and Business Affairs, Caleb Orr, moderated by Daniel Bring, the Executive Editor of American Affairs.
Thank you all for joining us this afternoon for a conversation that I think is one of the more covers some of the more exciting developments in the entire energy space, in the entire diplomatic outlook of this administration and the prospects for new alliances and new economic relationships to be forged. I'm very glad to be joined by Assistant Secretary Orr here, who has been across the hemispheric energy issues that the administration has been tackling. And, I think we're going to have a great conversation about how the admin is capitalizing on that. So, first I'd like to ask, the Western Hemisphere is really proving to be the new world once again in terms of energy discovery. We have the most productive oil field in the world right here in the Permian Basin, and we have tremendous new discoveries like the Stabroek Field in Guyana, the shale in Argentina, and also known resources that are now being capitalized upon. How does the admin seek to pursue sort of a resource abundance in the Western Hemisphere from all of these new resources being discovered?
Well, thanks, Daniel. It's great to be here at the American Affairs Energy Imperative Summit. I've been a longtime fan and reader of American Affairs, even when it was just a journal publishing some heterodox essays, which I guess it's still that. But now you're hosting fancy conferences here in DC. But it's great to be here, and it's a real privilege to speak on behalf of the Trump administration about what we are doing in the Western Hemisphere when it comes to a hemispheric energy alliance. We have a lot of countries throughout the region that we work with on security matters, and I think one of the big shifts in the Trump administration is the focus on the Western Hemisphere. The national security strategy that was issued in December of last year is very clear on this point and announces the Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, which is, in essence, about taking the region seriously and ensuring that the United States and our partners in the region, who we view as great allies in security matters, that we're the ones who control the destiny of the region and not any adversarial outside power. And I think energy is one of the areas that is at the top of our minds when it comes to how to implement that aspect of the doctrine. When you look at just the history of the geography of energy production, number one, the Western Hemisphere used to play a more significant role, especially because of the historic production of countries like Venezuela. But even once the geography started to shift away from the Western Hemisphere, when you look at the time of the Arab oil embargo, the total global production that the countries who participated in the embargo controlled at that time was 36%. And as of today, the Western Hemisphere produces 32% of global crude oil production. And so, and that's growing every year. So the Western Hemisphere really has become one of the key theaters in the shifting geography of energy production, and the U.S. Has a real opportunity to lead and benefit from that. I think one of the most significant factors that should draw your attention to the region for energy production and energy infrastructure is the political focus of the administration on the region. The Trump administration and the national security strategy announces our focus on enlisting partners that we are aligned with. And so there are some key governments throughout the region that we work with. You can think of Ecuador, Argentina, El Salvador, and others that we work extremely closely with hand in glove on security matters. And so it's only natural that when energy resources come online and and new discoveries are made in these countries, that we can coordinate on those matters as well. And so I think what you're seeing is this overlap, this confluence of forces between the overall political imperative that the United States has to work very closely with aligned governments in Latin America, with the current energy market that's driving a lot of exploration and increased production in Latin America. And these two things overlap because as we increasingly get more aligned and more interested governments in Latin America, they're aligning with us when it comes to their policies that promote energy production, like you're seeing in Argentina right now with some of the new production coming in. So I think it's a very exciting time to be looking at the Western Hemisphere for energy production, and it's one where the United States really stands to benefit from a lot of the trends going on.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, certainly the trends in governments across Latin America has been really encouraging. A lot of countries shifting towards, you know, renouncing kind of anti-American governments, shifting towards governments that are more friendly to American business and towards hemispheric cooperation. Uh, I'm curious, what are the tools available to the administration or available specifically to EEB in furthering some of these energy relationships and supporting either private investment or partnerships with the governments in those countries?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm the Assistant Secretary of State for Economic, Energy, and Business Affairs, and so I lead at the State Department our Bureau of Economic, Energy, and Business Affairs. And what our bureau does is really supply the State Department and our posts throughout the world with the expertise and the priorities that they need in order to execute on our energy diplomacy worldwide. And what does that mean in practice? I think it's worth saying, and just for background for everyone, we have a major diplomatic interest in energy exploration. Frankly, probably even more than economics alone would dictate. Um, Exploration for oil and gas, especially, creates diplomatic assets for us as a department. It gives us new initiatives to work on with foreign governments. Especially in governments that may or may not have had previous economic engagement with the United States, and countries like Guyana is a great example. And so it gives us new things to work on with foreign governments. It creates new revenue streams for foreign governments that help them grow and allow us to increase our engagement and expand the relationship. And so we really do have a huge interest in promoting oil and gas exploration. But then also, that's, as you all know, is only the first step. We have a major interest in, once we have assets that we've identified, that our companies have identified, in driving more investment, more production, because it's good for the market, it's good for the United States in lowering prices, and it's good in creating jobs for host governments where we are aligned. So we really try to drive, especially oil and gas interests abroad. And use that as diplomatic leverage to secure our diplomatic priorities of making America safer, stronger, and more prosperous. And that's ultimately good for our foreign partners as well. As far as the tools that we use, we really use the whole panoply. Our primary tool in diplomacy, of course, is communication. And under Secretary Rubio, the State Department has really put an emphasis on investing in being on the ground in the field, and being very clear communicators with our foreign partners. And so we're very clear globally, and in the Western Hemisphere especially, how much a priority oil and gas production is. And the contributions that our companies and our foreign partners can make to the United States energy dominance agenda. And so we work very closely with them. We then have some, several countries where we have projects or initiatives that are well underway, where the United States can play a helping hand in driving progress. Venezuela is obviously one of them, where you've seen production rapidly grow back to where it was several years ago because of the Trump administration's engagements, President Trump's decisive action on January 3rd, and we're working very closely with the Venezuelan government to really bring the very rich reserves they have back online and drive investment in their oil sector, which is fantastic for them, both in terms of unlocking new resources, new jobs, bringing people back to Venezuela who had left in previous years, but also increasing the revenues available to them to pay their government employees, invest in infrastructure, et cetera. And so in doing that, we have the opportunity to help shape regulations. We have the opportunity to help identify, trusted partners who can work with them, and really that's I think one of the signal initiatives that this administration has. But it's not the only one, and throughout the region, we offer technical assistance and other assistance packages to help foreign ministries reform their regulations and make for a much more open and competitive market for U.S. companies to go in and invest.
Yeah, I mean that it's very exciting to see what's happening in Venezuela. I mean, the production for a country with the largest reserves in the world, production had resembled a much weaker oil producing country for a while, and now they're back at levels of globally competitive production. I mean, to drill down on that a little bit, or to get sort of a forecast.
No pun intended.
Yes, no pun intended. To drill down a little bit, what do you think is sort of the is the timeline for or the directional forecast of U.S. involvement in the Venezuelan energy sector, and how soon do you think we will start realizing some of the the key benefits in terms of refinery economics, in terms of access to certain crude grades that we've heard so much about since the global energy shock?
Well, look, we're operating under Secretary Rubio and President Trump's three-phase plan for Venezuela, which involves number one, stabilizing the country, preventing collapse of the government, preventing civil conflict. Two, recovery, which is recovering the economy, recovering the oil sector, really getting the basic infrastructure operational so that you can have a functioning economy. And then three, ultimately, transition. And so, we are working diligently on recovering the Venezuelan economy. And we're moving as fast as we possibly can. As Secretary Wright said yesterday, we've seen oil production triple since December. And I think everyone is aligned when it comes to what our interests are, which is to increase oil production as fast as possible, and that's good both for the U.S. market, and we've got heavy crude refineries in the Gulf that can take Venezuelan crude and are extremely well positioned to benefit from Venezuelan crude coming back online. And also for the Venezuelan government and for their people. The oil sales are their most significant source of revenues, most significant driver of economic growth. They're a country that has some 200 billion in outstanding sovereign debt, and so oil production is going to be critical to meeting all the objectives. And so I think everyone benefits from increasing production as fast as possible in Venezuela, and the authorities there understand that very clearly. They have been fantastic to work with. We work with them every single day. They're very practical, and so we feel very good about the directions in Venezuela. We're really only 5 months out from the January 3rd operation. It may feel longer than that, but I think we're kind of exactly where you would want to see the relationship on a trajectory. When we came in, inflation was at 600% and up year over year. That has been steadily declining, and the most recent numbers I've seen have the month-over-month inflation at sub 10%. And so the country really is headed on a positive economic trajectory, and we want to help them use that breathing space, which they haven't had in quite some time, to really lock in the fundamental reforms that will drive progress, over the long term, and ultimately enable all of us to achieve our political objectives in Venezuela. So I think we're focused on outcomes, more than timeframes.
That makes sense, and I think to talk about strategic outcomes, or to talk about the topic of forging this alliance. I mean, what do you see as potential avenues to leverage both like the resiliency of the North American energy system that already exists, and to leverage these new relationships in either global strategic competition or in securing national security gains for the American people.
Yeah, again, I would go back to the very high level political emphasis that the Trump administration has placed on the region. Number one, when you just go back to first principles of foreign policy or geopolitics, the United States, we are the superpower of the world, and we are the leading power in our region. And under just traditional foreign relations theory, that means that our region should be a shared and mutual, but a source of strength for the United States. And for too long, the region was not that. The United States neglected the region. The region was a source of immense cost to the United States in terms of drugs and drug trafficking, illegal migration, and just a general deterioration in the security and business investment environment. And we had countries like China, or in the case of Venezuela, Russia, or even Iran, coming in and taking control of some very significant assets, including energy assets, by the way. And so the Trump administration has made a priority of the region and focusing on the region, taking it seriously, and saying, look, as the hegemon, we need to make this a source of strength, and it's something that the region will benefit from as well as us. And so that's where we're starting from. And the most important thing is really the table stakes for any kind of productive economic relationship is security. And so that's why you've seen such an immense focus by the Trump administration on security in the region. That's why our best partners are the ones who work hand in glove with us on security. And you're going to continue to see that. I mean, that is the foundation upon which all of this is built. Now, I think there's a relationship, though, between security and the investments in security and things like exploration. And not just in oil and gas, but also in critical minerals. There's a direct relationship between having the economic interest and the incentive to go secure some of these outlying regions of countries in the hemisphere, and being able to tap them and make them resources for us, and allow our companies to invest in upstream assets. So I think there's a very close connection between those two things. And so I think the closest collaboration that you're seeing is on the relationship between security and bringing new reserves and other assets online, so that we can actually increase production. I think taking a step further downstream, what we've seen in the last few years is the region, especially for crude oil production, the region has really increased production in lockstep with the United States. The region has really looked to the United States as a model for how to increase production. Countries throughout the region, Argentina, obviously, most recently, Venezuela, most recently, but Brazil has increased production significantly over the last 3 years as well. And there's other countries too that are still producing significant amounts, like Ecuador, that we think can be key partners. And that increase is happening in tandem with the United States energy dominance agenda and the amount of increase that we have. And so I think what you're seeing really is the confluence of trends that are really enabling this moment where the United States and our partners can come together and identify, where can we help identify new sources of supply to meet needs in the region? Where can we identify new sources of infrastructure to make energy more available? Just as an example, I was in El Salvador 3 weeks ago, where the largest foreign investment in the history of El Salvador is a DFC-funded LNG to power project. And just because of the geographically distributed nature of LNG, the region really stands to benefit from having more access to U.S. LNG, and so there's an immense amount of interest throughout the region in building more LNG regasification terminals or floating, and so these are key priorities for us as well. And we think that we can ultimately, at the end of the day, drive an economic renaissance and drive more nearshoring by making energy more affordable throughout the region.
I mean, I think everyone could benefit from more American LNG, but we've talked a lot about oil and gas, and I do want to, on the point of transmission or on the point of critical minerals, I do want to ask about the administration's priorities in pursuing energy diversification, or both in terms of creating export markets for U.S. energy technology in the region, or also the is the admin, for instance, thinking in terms of how do we export nuclear reactor technology? How do we get some of our partners in the region to embrace what our energy manufacturers are putting out there, and what our sort of energy industrialists are trying to build?
Absolutely. I mean, a key part of what we do is advocacy, in the small a advocacy sense for U.S. companies who want to provide supplies to producers in the region, and that can be, major private producers who are doing upstream, and you have suppliers coming in. That can be the state oil companies like PDVSA, for example, in Venezuela, where we want U.S. companies and U.S. suppliers to come in and provide the key components. We want the Western Hemisphere should be a market, an export market for U.S. suppliers. So that's something that we do in the ordinary course, up and down the supply chain. And yeah, on diversification, I think critical minerals I mentioned earlier is a key part of our strategy as well, where the region can be a resource for upstream assets and for creating new sources of supply. There's a lot of focus on Africa as being a key source of critical minerals, but as a matter of geology, a lot of the same reserves are in South America. And there are some countries that because of political instability or the security situation, really have not tapped their resources in a sophisticated way yet. And so we are looking to help them do that through foreign assistance and other tools to bring new reserves online. So it's not just oil and gas, although that is one of the main focuses that we have. It's critical minerals, it's power grid infrastructure. The national security strategy actually calls out power grid infrastructure specifically, and says that creating resilient power grid infrastructure and lowering energy costs in the region is one of the key components of being able to bring back industries closer to the United States. And so this is all part of a broader nearshoring and resilient critical supply chains agenda.
Absolutely. I think I'd like to sort of zoom out now to think about the global context of this shift. We have obviously the conflict in the Middle East driving the supply shock, not really for the U.S., but for a lot of our partners outside of the Western Hemisphere. We have China remaining a very large destination for a lot of the oil that's being produced in the in the Western Hemisphere, particularly in countries like Brazil or Mexico, also I believe. And we also have a situation in Europe where, although they are importing a lot more energy from the U.S., that they were otherwise importing from Russia at the beginning of the war, they are, the EU is going to be the EU, and they're actively trying to make the business environment more hostile, not only to U.S. energy companies, but to their own energy companies. So how do you see the Western Hemisphere serving as kind of a foundation of strength, and also almost a self-contained system in the face of global instability and strategic competition?
Yeah, look, again, we want the Western Hemisphere to be a national security asset for the United States, full stop. And we're stepping into a situation where, because of the lack of attention that the United States has historically paid to Latin America over the last 2 decades, the existing supply chain relationships are not always in a great position. And so we are actively reforming those and trying to make them work in an economical sense, of course, but make them work for the region so that the region can be more sovereign and more self-contained. Whether that's, for example, creating more copper smelters in South America so that China has less of a monopoly on the copper smelting market. Another example is how we've been approaching Venezuela's critical minerals sector as well, where there's a general license for the gold sector in Venezuela that Treasury issued several months ago that requires that the gold that's mined in Venezuela come to the United States for refining before it can be sold elsewhere. And so, that is something where we go by on a sector by sector basis and ask, with the industry input in an in a way that's efficient and that makes sense economically, how can we use the natural resources and help our foreign partners use their natural resources of the region in a way that both helps them and keeps those resources and the value chain within the hemisphere, because at the end of the day, that is what will make for the redundancy and the resiliency that we need to be able to benefit from the region's resources, come what may in the geopolitical environment.
What do you see as the greatest threats to this, to building cohesion, to building supply chains, to building greater integrity in the Western Hemisphere?
That's a good question. I mean, look, all of this hinges on political stability. And I think one of the reasons why the region had not previously developed these resources to the extent that they currently are and at the rate they currently are is political instability. And so the foundation of this new turn to the Western Hemisphere is political stability. And under Secretary Rubio, under President Trump, we are taking a very active approach to enlisting new allies in the region. We are being very open with the region in describing what our priorities are and asking governments to work with us in advancing those priorities in their own countries, and actively promoting aligned governments throughout the region. And so I think that really is the foundation. And without that, it would be much more difficult to have the kind of certainty that both the U.S. government and the private sector need to make the investments that we're looking at in the region. Now, that being said, there are some assets, and the U.S. has leverage even in situations where we're not aligned with governments 100%. We have the ability to go into countries and identify assets that are absolutely critical to national security and continue to pursue investments there. So I think that's something where you for example, just Brazil and Colombia are both situations where there have been some high level tensions between our governments, and yet at the same time we are still promoting investment in, say, rare earths in Brazil, and we still have very strong business to business ties in Colombia. And so, the political alignment really is critical on the foundation, and that's what unlocks the kind of investment that we need to see. But at the end of the day, now that we've identified the region as being a priority, and now that we've identified, especially critical mineral supply chains as being one of our biggest priorities as administration, it's something that we're going to pursue, regardless of who's in power in the region.
Certainly. I think that there is a lot to be optimistic about in the region, and certainly the administration is pursuing a lot of things along those lines to build up production. I mean, to return again to the central question of this energy alliance, of forging a hemispheric energy alliance, what does an alliance look like? What we talked a little bit about the oil embargo. What does the beyond the point of political stability, beyond the point of investment, beyond the point of some degree of a high degree of cooperation, what does coordination, what does, we were talking about the idea of an Ameripact, what does that look like?
Stay tuned. You said that, not me, but look, I think
it's a great report. We've and counted on.
American Affairs, publishes some fantastic stuff, and I hope to see more on that soon. Look, I think there's a lot to work with there, and what you're seeing in Venezuela is a great example where we have new resources that are coming online. We have U.S. companies that are going in, and we are working directly in an extremely hands-on fashion with the government to do what's necessary to enable the production that we want. And we're doing it, it happened sequentially in a time when energy markets really needed new production. being able to bring online Venezuelan production has been extremely helpful for the United States and our energy markets, but not just us. I mean, Europe is buying Venezuelan crude. India is buying Venezuelan crude. And so having this kind of very close collaboration in helping drive the timing of production and the timing of production increases has been very strategically valuable for the United States and for our broader foreign policy. And so I think at this point, what I can say is that working with countries in the region to build the kind of latent capacity that we can build, given the amount of reserves, given the amount of investment, is something that will redound to our benefit and enable us to act, and increase our sovereignty and our ability to have freedom and flexibility to respond to a variety of geopolitical situations. And that's true for our partners in the region as well.
All right. Thank you very much, Caleb. This has been excellent.
Thanks, Daniel.